Good morning. Thank you for braving the elements to be here. So this is Beyond Student Evaluations of Teaching, Term Faculty Perspective. And I'm Lauren Weiss from the Department of Philosophy and Religion, and I'm the Director of the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program, and on the College of Arts and Sciences. And I'm here representing both the Senate Term Faculty Committee, which I've just joined, along with Robert, who can introduce themselves, and I also serve on the College of Arts and Sciences Term Faculty Task Force.
Bob Cecina from COGOD, and as was mentioned by Lauren, I'm on the Term Faculty Committee, brand new member.
And I'm Robert Kelly. I'm Assistant Professor at SIS and also member of this Term Faculty Committee, which I happen to chair now. Just so you have an understanding of what that is, this is a committee that was launched in the winter of 2012, January 2012, as a means to properly implement policies that had been reshaped, introduced into the latest iteration of the faculty manual. So it was our job on an ad hoc basis with as broad representation as we could muster to try to make sure that those were implemented properly, and if there were any inconsistencies in the language, that we worked out those inconsistencies in cooperation with the Executive Committee and the Senate and the DAA. So where this committee is going now is that it seems to be evolving into a more of an advocacy-like body, which I think is a good thing, and I think all of us agree that this sort of advocacy is necessary. We've seen the adjunct faculty organize and develop their own voice, which has been an important step for them. And in the middle here is us, term faculty with a very large representation on campus, a growing representation continually, and what kind of voice does this group have in the university, and how will we get our interests heard and represented. And so this issue of SETs is important because it so happens that term faculty's performance is evaluated in large part on the data that is generated by students on these student evaluations of teaching. And so I think what we're going to talk about today is not only where things stand with the SET as a tool of measuring evaluation and how the academic units interpret that data and utilize that data, but as the name implies, going beyond that. How do we diversify the data points that we collect when we evaluate teaching, especially for term faculty? And I'll certainly be sharing some of my perspectives from SIS, and in this panel here we've got other representation from other units. My proposal here is just if we could maybe take, how much time do we have until 10:30? Is that
10:15.
10:15? Maybe take 10 minutes per person.
Also, I think it would be, since we have a small group here, and I see a number of our committee members
here,
if people could introduce themselves.
Yeah, sure. We can do that, but I mean, just as a point of order, to share our thoughts in kind of sequence, and then open it up for everybody else to ask questions and share ideas. But taking on your recommendation, if we could get introductions around the room.
Okay, I'm Ralph Sonnenschein. I'm in the Department of Economics in my 5th year as a term faculty member. Very interested in this subject, and I also serve on the term faculty committee. I started doing that in the fall.
This is the CAS one.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which has to be distinguished.
You're on the Senate.
There's a university level, and then there's a CAS level.
Right, and actually, I've felt in the dark about so much, and these kind of things have shed some light. Not enough, but a lot on things.
Don't feel badly. I've been term faculty for 12 years. I didn't know there was a Senate committee until I went on it.
Right.
I'm Evan Kraft, also in the economics department, and it's my 3rd year as term faculty. And I'm a little bit less in the dark from talking to Ralph, but now I'm pretty in the dark, so hopefully learn some things.
We'll stay over here, Jeff.
Jeff Sosland, I'm also on the committee. I'm with SPECS, the School for Professional Extended Studies. I've been term faculty for about 11 years.
Jeff is on the university committee.
They keep on going on.
Corinne Horn, School of Communication, Public Communication Division. My 2nd year, and also serving on the university committee.
also term faculty in SIS.
Andrea Pearson from the Art Department. I teach art history.
Nuria Villanova from World Languages and Cultures. I serve in the term faculty task force from CAS, and that task force was launched last year as part of the Dean's Advisory Committee in CAS, when after the survey they realized that there was a need to just focus on term faculty issues, and we produced, and this is like publicity just, we produced a report last year, last spring, with a recommendation from faculty at the CAS level, but I think it went beyond CAS level and went across the area as well, somehow. So I'm part of that task force.
I'm Jacqueline Cynthia from the Department of Physics.
You me?
Yes.
I'm Chris Touch from biology, term faculty. This is my end of my 14th year teaching here. I'm also on the CAS term faculty task force, and I'm also the chair of vice for the Dean's Advisory Committee in CAS as one of the term faculty members.
Lacey Wooden. This is my 15th year as a term faculty member. I'm in the Department of Literature. And I was on the previous iteration of the university term faculty committee, which was back in 2009, and then the second version of it up through last year. And I'm currently serving as vice chair of the faculty senate.
Had some newcomers into the room, so if you could take a second to introduce yourselves.
Sure, Thomas Nissy from term faculty in school education at
Ludi Grandas, World Languages and Cultures. From faculty, this is my third year. Same thing for me, but my name is Carmen. That was brief.
I got concerned for a second.
Not at all. We're just getting started. All right. So, Lauren, would you like to kick things off with?
Sure. So I hope I have made enough copies. Now we have extras up here. This handout that's gone around is highlight summary of a report that's been published from the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning in the summer of 2013, called Report on or Beyond Student Evaluation of Teaching Project. So this is just some highlights that I thought would be relevant for our conversation. So does anybody need an extra copy?
I have one as well.
So, and actually I'd like to recognize Chris Tudge, my fellow traveler on many committees. He's been doing a lot of work on this for our term faculty task force. And one of the things that I thought was most relevant and interesting about this report is that CTRL decided to focus exclusively on tenure-line faculty in their research on university practices and policies related to the use of student evaluation of teaching for faculty evaluation. So they throw in some references here and there to, oh yes, this should probably apply to term faculty and to adjunct faculty as well, but there's been no widespread study of the use of student evaluation of teaching. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is they asked a lot of questions about how various units were using sets in the both the rank and tenure process and the merit review process. And I thought it would have been fairly straightforward and simple for them to slip in an additional question in their survey as to, do these policies apply to term faculty? Do these policies apply to adjunct faculty? But they didn't. So I thought that was an interesting oversight, perhaps, on their part, especially in light of the fact that student evaluations of teaching are so important for term faculty members because term faculty do so much teaching. So a couple things to highlight here. There is concern at the university level that perhaps there's too much emphasis on student evaluations of teaching as a sole means to evaluate teaching. Not only that faculty members don't understand how sets are being used in the evaluation process, but also that it may not reflect best practices in academia to rely solely on student evaluations of teaching as an evaluation measure. The other thing that there's some emphasis on here that we've also been working on in the College of Arts and Sciences that I think relates to STEP is the question of faculty mentoring. So there's a lot of focus in the CTRL report on the idea that mentoring, collegial faculty mentoring, could be a powerful tool in improving, the phrase they use is pedagogical excellence at the university level. And one thing that they note in their recommendation is that CTRL has a service that they offer whereby faculty members whose sets and whose evaluations aren't meeting the bar that each school has set, the teaching units can refer those faculty to CTRL for professional development related to teaching. But the CTRL is kind of overwhelmed at this point with referrals, and they're trying to push some of that back to the unit level. Now, the one thing that they don't mention or clarify in the report is who are the people being referred. The report focuses on tenure-line faculty members, but I would presume, correctly or incorrectly, that it's not only tenure-line faculty members who are being referred to CTRL for this kind of professional development. In fact, I know personally of several cases in the College of Arts and Sciences of new term faculty members, first-year term faculty members, whose contract renewals were tentatively denied simply on the basis of their set scores, and their units pushed back, and they were allowed a little bit of leeway, but were required to go through a unit designed but approved by the college plan for teaching improvement, some of which involved referral to CTRL.
One thing, I have an experience where I had, for a midterm evaluation, my department chair, associate dean, recommended I just, not because my set scores were low per se, but to go see Marilyn Goldhammer at CTRL. And she was wonderful. I had no idea how much feedback she could give me on my syllabus, and she observed my classes, and then we talked about it, and it was a really powerful tool for me. And you know, at School of Education Teaching and Health, we have Marilyn Goldhammer, but it would be nice if each department had their own CTRL contact that could circulate around faculty and the different classes.
The system the library has,
Yes,
for example.
I guess so.
COGOT has Michael Mathos. It's sort of our go-to person.
You have somebody for, and I mean, not one for all of College of Arts and Science, yeah, for each department and school, but it was very helpful for me, and I've taught for many years, and there's just a lot of knowledge there.
This is actually one of the recommendations from Naomi Maryland's report. So I think following from the fact that the CTRL is sort of overwhelmed with requests from units, they recommend that academic units should be encouraged to create mechanisms for mentoring pedagogical excellence at the teaching unit level. But they also they'll explore the possibility of creating a university-wide cadre of faculty mentors to presumably focus primarily on pedagogy. And there were 4 kind of themes that they mentioned in an appendix to the report that I thought were interesting, that point to best practices at other institutions. So the one is overall mentoring of faculty. And we've been doing a lot of study of this in College of Arts and Sciences, both in the Term Faculty Task Force and in the Dean's Advisory Committee. And one of the schools that they mention is the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, which is a program that I've done some research on. And they have won multi-$100,000, I think $400,000 grant from the Mellon Foundation to develop programs for faculty mentoring. So they point to that program in particular as a kind of standout mentoring program. They also mentioned peer observation, the development of faculty teaching portfolios, and reflective ways to interpret student evaluation feedback. And one of the questions, sort of overall questions in the report is what, at the university level, so through the Faculty Senate, for example, what should we as a university be encouraging, what sort of practices? And then the big question is then, are these practices that should be encouraged as voluntary, or are they practices that should be required? So for example, they point to the development of faculty teaching portfolios. How should they be used? And if the university is going to encourage certain practices around peer evaluation and the development of teaching portfolios, it's essential, according to the recommendations, that the university step up resources to make that happen, which I think is a really big issue on this campus. I'm sure that there'll be more that I can talk about from CIS once we get into discussion. But
Okay.
Steve?
I'm a great believer that where you stand in life depends on where you sit. So let me tell you kind of where I've sat most of my career in a sentence or two. I'm fundamentally a finance guy, and I'm a numbers guy. So my last job was with American Express, and I ran Latin America for the company. And so the first thing I would mention that isn't necessarily widely known is that because term faculty are paid very roughly 2/3 of what tenure line faculty are paid, and we're about 50% higher teaching load in terms of revenue generation, and we're not an endowed university, 95% of our revenue comes from tuition, we are twice as productive. So that says the research done, some of us do research, I don't, and the research community is very grateful that I don't. But that puts, I mean, research's got to be highly valuable to say that you can afford tenure line faculty. So if this place ever got into financial trouble, I tell you what I do is freeze every tenure line faculty hire in the place and replace them with term faculty. So that's sort of a starting point. Secondly, let me run through the COGOD process, because it works very hard to be objective about a process that at the end of the day is going to have some substantive piece of subjectivity to it. Our merit performance evaluation process begins with FARS. So if you don't have your input done in the faculty activity reporting system by January 31st, no matter whether you're tenured, untenured, full professor, you are ineligible for a merit increase. So that's for starters. Then we basically divide, and that input goes to the department chair, and the evaluation process is done by the executive committee of the school, which includes key staff members as well as the department chairs, and of course the dean. And the process for merit reviews is there's one pool and it's level playing field, whether you're a full professor or you're exec in residence, and whether you're your first year or your 12th year, the criteria is the same. We use a 4-point evaluation scale, and we divide in between teaching and service. 75% teaching, 25% service. And we've just started a new process. I haven't engaged in it personally yet, but I plan to, where you can negotiate with your department chair to change that 75-25. So in my own case, for example, I'm teaching somewhat less and doing a lot more in service. So I'm going to negotiate for a 60-40 split. I'll probably start 50-50 and let them pull me to 60. You know, it's like buying a car, kind of thing. We just talked about that. So, you know, a 4-point scale that ranges from needs improvement to excellent. Teaching, SETs are a part, but only a part. We start off with what your teaching load is. So not just the number of courses, but we look at the number of preps, and we look at the number of students that you taught. So it's a very quantitative, revenue-oriented, keep coming back to that word. We are a business school, so you gotta take that into account. The SETs are a part of that, and everybody is compared against the COGOD average, which is, when I found out what it was, I was surprisingly a bit on the high side, higher than I thought. It's 6.04%, or 6.04 on the 7-point scale. And so, yeah, I didn't think we had that many good. So to get above the 6.04 is a bit of a, you know, you got to do some work. You got to be pretty good. So that's the teaching piece. I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have available with me the split as to what the relative importance of all of those things are. But I do know that folks that are struggling, whether they're term faculty or not, are assigned mentors and are helped to improve. And one of the curious things, by the way, that happens in academia, being a business guy, I sometimes find things puzzling, but if people are unproductive in research, they're actually assigned a higher teaching load. Why would you do that? I mean, seriously, figure out a way to make them more productive in research or do something with them. But
I think that's university-wide now.
yeah?
Yeah.
You know, basically that foists them onto our students, which I regard our students not as customers. Customers is sort of a retail term. The customer's always right, and rule 2 is there is no rule 2. Go back to rule 1, the customer's always right. But clients are different from customers, and I believe our students are clients. And the client is sometimes wrong, and it's our obligation to tell them. So I've done a lot of consulting work, and I consider it my professional obligation to look a client in the eye and say, that's not right. Let me give you the benefit of my best thinking on the subject, and which is always a polite way of saying you're out of your mind. But, and the service comes, the 25% comes right off of the FARS report. And that, you know, that can range from everything like, be sure that this year's FARS, for me, is going to say that I was on this panel, okay, to serving on the term faculty committee, to bringing in external guest speakers as a laundry list. How you then evaluate that, how this committee evaluates that, is very subjective. I mean, the more items you got in the list, if you can make it 3 pages long, cool. That's got to be helpful. But also, I think you know, the folks on that committee have a sense of what your general reputation is in the place. Are you a go-to person? Are you the kind of person who sort of never says no? And that impacts where you come out in service. We have annual awards. So we, and it's the same criteria for term faculty as it is for tenured faculty. So you can get an award that has cash associated with it. It's like $1,000. I think each one is $1,000. And you can be awarded both. You can be awarded, if you're a 4-4, you would get both an award for teaching and an award for service. If you're not a 4 in teaching, but you're a 4 in service, you get $1,000 for service. In fact, we may have raised it to $1,500 with inflation being what it is. So that's our process. And Lauren and I were talking earlier about, you know, I believe a process like that could work across the university, and that I don't see any reason why department chairs would be allowed to have their own idiosyncratic fiefdoms in this regard. And Lauren was arguing a bit, I don't want to put words in her mouth, that there would be a need for variations. And I mentioned, you know, at the risk of sounding a bit arrogant, I ran a bank with 3,000 people in 33 countries around the world, from France to Germany, where we were unionized, to India, to you name it. We use the exact same process in every country around the world, including staff in New York, including me, including my boss, including the CEO of American Express. I'll stop there. Yeah?
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
Does everybody in Kogod know this, what you just said?
Yeah, because every when you're told what your increase is, you get an in-writing evaluation from your department chair that specifically mentions all these criteria and how you stacked up. So you can't not know.
And verbal too, or just in writing?
If you want to. You know, that's a little idiosyncratic. Some department chairs don't like to sit and look face to face and say, hey, you're really kind of a bum, you know. But you could get that letter and request a meeting with your department chair and the letter specifically says they're available to do that.
See, that's a key link, because you don't always know what good is,
Yeah,
you know, and you
yeah,
think
and
your
it's a
good
relative term.
is, you know, both in the set and your service. How do you know what good is?
Yeah.
Gee, I went to
That's the
Wednesday.
one that's probably most, I would say, subjective, is the service piece. But you know, the awards are also presented publicly in the first council meeting we have, the beginning of the semester. The dean stands up there and makes the announcement name by name and hands out a certificate, and you know, a payment comes into your next pay statement. So everybody knows who gets what, and I tell you from my own experience, there are very, very, very few surprises when people get their awards. I mean, you know who the top teachers are in COGOD, and who's sort of carrying more than their own level of water, you know, above average in terms of service.
Thanks, Bob.
Yep.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is a little bit the outcome of my kind of deep thinking onto this subject of SETs, and also the process as it takes place in SIS, where I am. The first question that I want to start with is you know, if there's so much disillusionment with SATs, why do we have them? Why do we use them? And the crude answer is twofold. One is, of course, to evaluate the teaching performance of instructors. And the other side of this is the student experience, because a lot of these questions are molded around how students are experiencing the class. Are you challenged? Are you satisfied? Would you take another course like this again? You know, so these are all, you know, temperature checks of our clients to see how they're enjoying their flight, right? And that's not bad. I mean, that's quite useful, actually. This is an instrument that's deployed university-wide, and we get a sense of how students are enjoying their collegiate experience. The trouble, of course, is that we're pairing experience with performance. We're taking experiencing, we're extrapolating from that something about the teaching performance. And we've got some flaws with that, right? For instance, self-reports have limits. Because students, I mean, if anyone does, you know, this as a survey methodology, you know very well that self-reports will just give you a limited picture of what that person is experiencing at a given moment. And of course, our chief problem with self-reports, most of all, is that people don't really know what they know. They tend to overstate or understate, or be momentarily paralyzed by the information around them and report on what it is that they see at a given moment. Students can be bought. They will readily admit this, right? Several years ago, the university had a small fund that teachers could avail themselves of at SET time, most conveniently, to pay for pizza. And when we did this, the SETs experienced a little bump. No surprises there, right? So students can be bought. They can also be sometimes bought with good grades, right? That if a professor looks upon them kindly in the evaluation department, then a student will respond favorably on the SET. Boy, that professor was lenient with me, right? Therefore, I had a good experience in the course, to say nothing about what I learned. And so this is probably the biggest drawback, right, is that it doesn't say anything about student performance. What they learned, where they were at the beginning of the course to where they were at the end, SETs tell us absolutely nothing about that. And so we don't know what they've come away learning, and the teacher can be a hard ass and teach the students a lot, and there's no recognition of that, but of course they get penalized for being a hard ass. I think we all know individuals who suffer that kind of fate. Now, on the back end, when this data gets generated by students, the interpreters of this data, and I'm speaking from an SIS perspective, are looking for a scant few data points. I mean, there are a number of questions on the SET, I don't know, 20-something. And I can tell you from experience and with utmost certainty, 100% certainty, that SIS is really only looking for 3 or 4.
Right. Reinforce that at COGOD.
Yeah, yeah. And so you know, the specific questions they're looking at are, number 5, are you being challenged? in the classroom. Number 6, overall, how satisfied are you with the instructor? And number 16, overall, how satisfied are you with the course?
Same 3.
That's it.
Right.
They might as well just administer an SET with those 3 questions, because that's really all that matters. The rest of the stuff could be thrown out the window. Right. And that's really unfortunate, all that effort. Like when you narrow it all down, those 3 questions factor disproportionately heavily into the whatever it is that the academic unit adopts as their factor for teaching evaluation. At SIS, it can be somewhere in the neighborhood of 90%. In Kilgod, we've heard 75%, and in other units, that number is probably somewhere in that ballpark of 75 to 85, 90%.
CAS standard for term faculty is 80-20.
You're right. So 80% at CAS. So when you carve away all the static and get to, okay, what inputs give us our output? It's really 3 questions that give us a factor that measures 75 to 90% of your performance, and will determine what your contract status is as a term faculty member. That's it. Now, if people aren't outraged by that, they should be. And one of the things that I see myself doing in this position as chair of the ad hoc term faculty committee is to stoke that kind of outrage that this is unacceptable. Because I don't think it's right that's what it's reduced to. So the other side of this then, the flip side now, looking on the positive side, is to go beyond, as the title suggests. So how can we create more touch points, right? To borrow a term from business, right? And then the touch points, how do we touch our clients in ways that they like, and multiply, right? Like get more data, triangulate, right? So we have SET, which tells us what students think about the class. That's great. We have 100% dependence on that data for your renewal. Now, what about performance? How do we get at student performance? Well, in SIS, I coordinate a course called Cross-Cultural Communication. It's the largest undergraduate course on offer at SIS. Every student who walks through that door has to take it. And what I have done is I've deployed a student survey of learning. We've piloted it now for a couple of years, and it has 24 questions. At the beginning of the term, students will take the survey, and it measures how much they know about the course content at the front end. They take the same exact survey again at the back end. And the differential is the learning, right? Just like the movie Smoke, right? We smoke the cigar, the ashes go, the difference is the weight of the smoke, right? So that's where we are, that's the difference. And it's a pre and post test. So over time, we are measuring student learning on a set of questions. They do not change. And all of these questions are in some way linked to one of the learning outcomes of the course. Measurable, right? So we've got 6 in SIS altogether. The only ones that I felt like I could measure with this survey tool were 4, the first 4. And all of those questions are connected in some way. So we're able to not only see change in the aggregate from, for survey scores, that's from start to finish, but also break it down into isolated course learning objectives and see which learning objectives are we excelling and which ones are we not. All the way down to the section to the instructor, and then I can deliver that information to the instructor and say, here's where you have been strong in your teaching of your students, and here's where you have been weak. And the differences are clear for everybody to see. I showed it at a workshop with my faculty, and everybody was like, wow, this is really useful. Now I see where I stand in relation to the other instructors in this course. How do I get better at what I'm weak at? And we had a very transparent conversation about that. So that's one method of measuring student performance that we're piloting at SIS and cross-cultural communication. But there are, obviously there are lots of challenges at trying to complete the triangulation, because the SET is a university-wide tool. Is there a way to come up with a comparable tool that can be rolled out university-wide in this way that does the job of measuring student performance and can provide everybody with that additional data point? Or do we have to go down to the unit level, even the course level, and come up with customized ways of measuring performance. That is a question that I think that the folks in this room can consider. But I think in general, it's in our best interest to find a way to go beyond the tool of evaluating teacher performance in the way that we do now and come up with a broader set of data points. I think I'd also like to heartily endorse what's being done in COGOD, and I've told other people about Bob's experience in COGOD. The level of transparency and the criteria in the merit review process and what exactly constitutes good teaching. It's not just the SETs, it's also the level, the number of students, and the number of sections, and the number of, this is the sort of transparency that I think outstrips, my assumption would be all other academic units, especially SIS, where we are actually becoming more opaque.
You're making a very good point
in our merit process.
I think the transparency is in fact more important than the process.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
You could make the process worse than ours or better or whatever. The transparency is the key.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Our system in CIS is a bit different, and transparency has been a real problem. So last year, the CIS Dean's Advisory Committee did a study on the merit process, not only of our internal merit processes, but best practices in merit evaluation in other universities. And the committee held a town hall meeting, and the dean presented to faculty the evaluation system that's used at the college level once data from the individual teaching units are reported to the college. And I heard tenured, very experienced faculty members say that they were completely unfamiliar with this process that had supposedly been used to evaluate them for years on end. There were particular scores, and I overheard a guy in the history department who's been an AU for 10 years saying, I've never even heard of that before. So I think transparency is a big issue. I completely appreciate that emphasis on transparency. But I also have some concerns about what kinds of developments and innovations might be squelched by such an emphasis on capturing certain data points. So for example, one of the things that we've been talking about in the College of Arts and Sciences is courses that are being cut or eliminated due to strict emphasis on enrollment counts, and how that can create huge problems for units that are trying to develop and launch new programs. So I wonder, how do we capture a measure of pedagogical competence or excellence for a new course that's never been taught before? For a course that maybe the learning objectives need to be clarified, over a couple of semesters. So I do think that there is some demand for what we've been calling kind of unit level autonomy, teaching unit level autonomy in the merit process, but I also think that there's a real need to balance that with transparency.
I would, as somebody who's invented, quite literally, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 courses in my time here, it is more or less a thankless task. It's a high-risk endeavor. We haven't mentioned this yet, but we get paid, execs in residence get paid to put butts in seats. And if you don't put butts in seats, forget about it. So if you don't have 15 students in a classroom, your class is looked at with great scrutiny to be canceled or not. And right now, I'm in the happy set of circumstances where all of my teaching load but one course is met by courses that I invented. But boy, I struggled for years to get those classes full. I did everything short of walking around the quad wearing sandwich boards saying, sort of like eat at Joe's, come to Bob's class. And, I'm now privileged of 2 courses I'm teaching this semester. 2/3 of the class are non-COGOD students. They're SISers principally and some CAS. Yeah, sorry.
Can I maybe clarify a couple points that I think got muddy in here? First of all, I think most term faculty are more concerned with reappointment than merit. Merit matters, but what we really care about is keeping our jobs, right? And so those processes, I think, tend to be even more opaque and muddy and unclear and blurry than probably the merit processes do. So I think that's one thing to kind of keep in mind, is really what we care about is reappointment, because the merit money is, for places other than COGOT apparently, is pretty significantly small.
Well, I didn't say the money was big, I said the process
So
was
that
big.
$1,000 is big.
That's a great point.
The other thing I think that is important to kind of keep clear, and I think that the CTRL report muddies this too, is the distinction between mentoring and evaluating. I think that it's quite easy for a unit to call something mentoring when in reality what they're doing is evaluating. And I think it's crucial that as we think about these things at the unit level, that they need to be pulled apart. And I think one of the places that shows up the most is, unfortunately, the getting sent to CTRL thing, instead of being a mentoring move, has started to come across as a punishment move. You're bad, so you get sent to CTRL. CTRL is not wild about this perception either. It exists, right? And that's a problem. And I think that's indicative of this blurring between mentoring and evaluation. The other thing too, I think is important to keep in mind, and this goes to Robert, your point about outrage. The faculty manual says that no personnel decisions can be made on the basis of evaluations. Units are repeatedly in flagrant violation of the faculty manual policy. And I think they disguise it in a variety of ways. Just read your faculty manual, do that. That's homework after this. Everybody should read it.
Wow.
They can't do it, and yet they do. And just, if I can take a minute to talk about the Senate angle on the CTRL report, because I think it kind of adds to what you're talking about. Naomi came to a Senate meeting last fall and presented this report. There was an extended discussion in the Senate of it, very substantive discussion. People talked a lot about the idea of learning outcomes. If we can measure learning outcomes, how might we do that? There was a lot of talk about how we can better evaluate teaching in general, a lot of concern about the SETs. And then at the close of it, the provost asked, his sort of take on it was, we need a committee to devise a new form. A new SET form. That was where he ended up. So what's going to happen is, CTRL has put together a bunch of research for us that we're really eager to get to see, that has about what other schools are doing in terms of evaluating teaching. There's going to be a Senate committee that will look at devising a new form. However, people on the Senate want it to be much more than that. Want it to be not just devising a new form, but looking at these other measurements of teaching, how we can offer guidance to units and requirements to units while allowing for unit autonomy. So that committee is going to get started this spring, and it will be looking at creating a new SET form, but also how can we measure teaching in other ways. So there's movement at the university level that I'm hopeful about. I mean, I would really like to be on that Senate committee to work on this, to make sure we have term faculty representation on it. So thank you.
Yes, just a couple of things. I think we have a kind of question here that goes beyond the SATs, and is that conception that we have about education and clients, and then you have clients to my understanding, you have clientelism, then you have the problem with what happened with the SATs and so on. But I don't think we should go that way now, because we could have, I come from another kind of avenue, and I would like to have that discussion sometime, but not now. The reason that I think we had this panel with SATs specifically for term faculty is because there are certain specificities that are more, are different for term faculty and for tenure OIG, that's for sure. I would like to point at those. Some of them have already been mentioned, but there is one that is still in my mind that I would like to address. Well, first of all, is the fact that we have approved the teaching load, so a higher one, or heavy one, it's 3 and 3 usually. Also, we don't generally now surveys and research can be accounted in the main, review, but that's still very new, as you said. It's not kind of, okay, 50% or 20%. This is still not well established. It depends on the teaching units, and it's still kind of there. The third point, and that's the one we haven't touched yet, is what kind of courses the faculty teach. Because not everybody is teaching the upper level courses that you design. I mean, I am a faculty that probably teaches both, and that's why I feel I can talk about this, because I teach a gen ed that I have been teaching since I arrived. Probably American, American history and literature, but at the same time I teach upper level, graduate level classes that I design myself. And always, I mean, I've been here for 5 years, that class gets a higher SET. Why? Because students take it because they want to take it. So the first approach to it is positive. When they have to do, like calculus or maths or
college writing,
language at the very elementary level as a requirement for SIS or,
Sign these reports, or there's some sort of accountability. Who gets evaluated and whose contracts are in any other profession, whose contracts are put forth and debated with such a body of evidence that to which there is no accountability, right? So, I wish we could eliminate these altogether, but, this is not going to happen, I guess. But, is there some way that there can be more control over the way in which students are reporting this information, and how it is then that, we can have more confidence in the outcome of that information?
There are schools that do signatures. They're still anonymous. But they've found, there are studies that have shown that if students have to put their name on their SAT, even if nobody ever sees them, they actually, the averages go up. It's really interesting. Yeah, there's been quite a bit of research in this in rhetoric and composition since we're so teaching focused.
Well, it would probably modify the behavior of the haters.
Yeah, right. It creates accountability, even if it's never seen.
And one of the things that was noted from the CTRL survey was that some units, probably a very small number, actually use student narrative comments as part of the evaluation process, which I found very strange because those are supposed to be private.
Supposed to see those.
So I don't know if that means narrative comments that are collected maybe through the pre and post test sort of thing, or if there are other measures.
I think we're all really aware of the limitations of SETs. And you could statistically try to say, well, they should be, I had a colleague who created, I'm an economist, right? So we did statistical analysis, controlled for your average grades and the class size, and then created a new rating, and then of course his ratings turned out to be great then. But anyhow, I think the point is, I agree with you that they're a necessary evil. But what surprises me, having taught elsewhere, is that you would expect that if we know that these are so limited, that we should be that there should be rather formalized other channels to evaluate. And I don't see how that happens in my own department. I don't think there's any standard university-wide. I was told, for instance, for FARS, not to write any great detail about how I teach or anything. Just a few objective comments about I did this activity or that activity. And I expected to have some chance to represent myself, to sort of say, this is what I do, so that somebody who's evaluating me at least has my voice there somewhere. And the process is very non-transparent. I don't know if there's any interest at the university level. I think this affects all faculty, not particularly necessarily the term, but I think it would give us a lot more sort of security of feeling like at least our voice is being heard about what we think we're doing, and somebody has to respond to that, because basically we have the student's voice, and we have some totally untransparent decision-making somewhere by our departments and perhaps by our deans. And I don't see, to me it's a black box beyond the SETs.
I find that very interesting that you were given that. Who gave you that advice, if you don't mind, about not putting too much detail in your FARS report? I mean, is that something that's
chairs and colleagues, yeah.
I mean, I was told the same thing in my unit for the reason that our unit's pretty small, and the rationale was, we already know what everyone's doing. You don't need to put that much detail. I thought, you don't know what I'm doing. Like, okay, maybe the tenure-line faculty know who's published this article and who's published this book, but you don't know all the work that I've put into prepping new courses and all the innovative pedagogy I'm working on. You just don't know.
And one of the I'm sorry.
Just a couple of points. You're talking about, like, to help campus-wide term faculty, a one-pager or two-pager of best practices, for example, what COGAT's doing, that I could go to my dean and say, this is what they're doing, and we should be doing this also. But I think there's a challenge of communication, which I think for the committee would be something.
Yeah, that's a role that our committee could.
Another thing that Lacey and I were involved with, and Phil is an advocate of this, is the reappointment. It's crazy how it's with these notebooks and it's all paper and it's not electronic. And it comes back to the sets discussion. But we really sort of advocate that this process of reappointment be streamlined and made easier for us to do, but also easier to sort of get this data of whatever the different points are. I just think that's something that we could advocate, and the sets sort of fit into that. Then a final 2 points is, all on the portal, all the sets are made available to people who can get into the portal. But there's no way of sort of analyzing that to say, okay, it specs the average is this on this. It's just everybody's got their own sort of line. I don't know if that's intentional or if it's a technology thing. I don't know if it's something that we would want to advocate, because I could see pros and cons on both, but it's something that should definitely be given some thought. And then the final thing is, there was just a leadership retreat where one of the issues that the provost is concerned about is grade inflation. And when we're talking about business and economics, we're talking about pad incentives. So where do the sets fit in as far as, and Robert, you already made this point, kind of, if grade inflation is a problem and the university wants to deal with it, how does that fit in with the sets?
That's a good point, Jeff.
Okay, just a question for Bob. So I had also briefly in passing mentioned COGAT's processes to a colleague of mine, and she said something about how COGAT is able to do that because you have a different funding stream than the rest of the university.
A different
Funding stream?
Oh, we do.
Could you explain that?
Yeah. It's actually, I think, a totally crappy deal for COGAT, and we are being screwed royally, but that's another subject. The way we are treated as an, in quotes, kind of profit center. 50% of all of our tuition revenue goes to the university. 100% of all of our expenses stay with us. And we're expected to be profitable on that basis. Now, Bob Kogat has been good enough a couple of years running to write a check for the variation, but that's fundamentally how Kogat works, and I think we're the only school that works that way.
So my colleague was making the link that because of this process, you're able to be so transparent, and you're able to have different university-wide evaluation.
I don't know why that would link to transparency. I mean, we create our own, within our budget, we create our own salary increase level. It's not a big number, but that develops a pot from which everybody draws. But the transparency of the process, the evaluation, et cetera, that's really not linked to our being a standalone profit center. I'm sorry.
I was just saying maybe because you can create your own merit pool.
Yeah, we do create our own merit pool. That basically says how big a number people are going to get. But again, even that merit pool, everybody draws, whether you're a full professor or a brand new first-year term faculty, you all draw from the same pool, and you're all held against similar criteria, though, for example, tenure line would be 40-40-20. 40 teaching, 40 research, 20 service, which curiously, that says for every course they teach, they get 10% of their time and work. Since mine is 75% and I teach 6, that's 12.5%. Yeah. Now, I don't ever raise that to anybody as to why I get more credit for teaching a course than tenured faculty. but I do.
And my sense, Corinne, is that this is a policy, like these policies are set at the unit level regardless of budget, I mean regardless of funding stream, because I know that in 2010 the SIS Faculty Council passed a measure to have all of this process put in writing, you know, in plain view for everybody. This is how you were evaluated. And for a year or two, we got letters with that kind of information, and then with the new regime, that's gone now. So we don't know. We don't know. So even though the rest of the faculty still thinks that this measure is in effect, it's not.
Wow, what a step backwards.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm shocked.
But just to build on these points and kind of going beyond the SATs, some term faculty do research, and you know, the appeal of media and things of that sort.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, just feel that there's very little attention.
It's not for whatever reason, it's because it's not part of your evaluation packet. That's 80/20, 75/25. It's not.
That's the faculty manual.
You're an SIS, Mohammed, right? There is like all of the units have to have some kind of language stating like this is how you get promoted and this is how you get evaluated, and so for us it's teaching first and foremost, like everybody else. Meaningful service, they call it meaningful, but don't really give any definition of what meaningful is, and nothing about scholarship. Now, if you do scholarship, this will matter if you are up for promotion for associate professor, right? I'm imagining right now you're somewhere in the professional lecturer track. Yeah. So right now this has no bearing on your promotional prospects up until that time. This is terrible.
That's a different track, though.
What's that?
That's a different track.
The professorial lecturer, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it's I mean, I perfectly understand this part, but see when you're in the media, like, I appear in everything with media all the time, which is and you know, there's the name of SS.
Yeah.
And then
I do too, but that goes on my FARs. I make sure that's on my FARs every time I'm on TV.
But it's not part, it's not.
Sorry? It doesn't matter.
Well, it matters in Kodak. And when I'm on TV, it goes to the
repeated statements of program directors at SIS is that it doesn't matter.
But does it matter in the way Lacey mentioned earlier, which is the contract renewal?
No.
No?
Not at SIS.
Really? Wow.
Just to give your committee more work, two suggestions of things you could maybe advocate for. Two things.
I think we're about done.
Yeah. Two things I think that would be useful, and I'm thinking of this actually in support of the Senate committee that's going to be working on this. One is to advocate for increased use of files for action for term faculty. I know in college writing we actually have, we call them portfolios, but they're quite significant files for action in which we submit teaching materials, cover memos, you know, a variety of things. I think most units don't do that. To me, it's appalling that people are reappointed based on ours. That's insane.
I thought file for action was required.
Sorry?
Yeah, we have file for action.
What's in it?
Yeah.
So
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
no, but we do our own. I mean, I'm saying we put together our own file.
Yeah.
We put our materials in it. That's inconsistent across the university, and I think that should be. I think it should be consistently done across the university. Then you have to. Then that sort of requires a response, you know, in a way. And I have a second point, but I know what it was. The other thing I think to advocate for that would again help the Senate side is. We have good guidelines in place for promotion now. I think those are very strong. They're very transparent. They're up on the DAA's website. We don't have good guidelines for reappointment. We don't have equivalent guidelines for reappointment. Those aren't the same thing. Promotion and reappointment should not be the same thing. Somebody who's a first-year term faculty member, their standards for reappointment should not be the same as somebody going up for senior professorial lecturer. We need separate sets of guidelines for each unit that are published, that are visible, and every unit across the university should have them. That, I think, one reason there's no transparency is because people don't know what to say because there are no guidelines that give them the language of what to say. And I think that the advocacy committee could certainly do a lot towards pushing from that end. You can't tell people to be more transparent. Well, you can, but they don't have to. But if you give them stuff, then I think the odds go up that they will.
And Lacey, just to be clear, there is a requirement for units to state their guidelines for promotion, but not for reappointment.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, no, they don't, as far as I know, they don't exist, and they certainly don't exist on the DA's website.
I don't think there's a requirement for promotion either. I think it's been taken up as a practice, but I don't think it's stated anywhere. in the
Well, they were all units were required to do them.
Yeah.
And if they did, at least in CAS, if they didn't do them, Peter gave them to them.
Yeah.
I think part of that
Yeah.
contract renewal issue is because all of us here are based on need. So if for some reason there isn't a need, then...
That's actually not true. If you're on cash lines, you're on a need basis. A cash line is the line gets renewed every year.
Mhm.
If you're on a baseline, your line is permanent.
Oh, I never heard of that one.
Yes.
And that's very
And that's a whole different issue, is getting people on more baselines instead of cash lines.
Oh, that's interesting. I never heard that one. That's something, I'd like to learn more about that. I like the word cash line, but I guess you want to be baseline.
All right.
Read our
So-
Wait, one more point. We're starting to run out of time. But
Yeah, because we're out of time.
Yeah.
The session was happening beyond the set. I assume that we would have ideas that maybe can be advocated of what are the other instruments beyond the set. And I said one, to get the voice of the instructor in there with the course. I just wonder if we can, at some point, let us do the task force, plural, get listing of things that other instruments that could be used besides the set. Because at the end of the day, this is the only thing they have. It's a blunt instrument, but it's the only thing they have, and all the complaining we do still fall
Isn't
back
going to
to it.
change.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will be one of the products of the Senate committee. Will be a list of things to use.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important for us to produce that.
Yeah, and I think what we've heard here is that there are a number of areas that we could be paying more attention to, like the number of preps, the number of students, like all these different factors, gen eds versus non-gen eds, that would have some kind of bearing on the performance of the instructor, regardless of what they've done in the classroom.
Right, but you can't measure that.
Exactly. So we've got to find a way to develop a tool that captures that. Yeah.
Last word, I hope. Two things. You think baseline is good, but remember that line is secure, but you in it isn't.
Right, right. Yes.
So,
okay.
so keep that in mind.
Yes, because it's not tenure.
The department keeps
Oh,
the line.
insecurity is spelled everywhere.
You
Don't
won't be
worry.
in it. It's not like that. So keep that in mind. Also, the second thing, I think we have our title for next year's Ann Parent, which will be 5, 6, 16 plus.
Yes, yes.
Oh, well, thank you all for coming.